Greetings, everybody, and welcome to session 27 of our 31-part series over the topic of prayer. In this particular session, this is the third part in our three-part mini-series over the topic of the Holy Spirit. 2 sessions ago, we looked at the topic of praying in tongues. In our last session, we looked at the topic of dreams and visions, which are a work of the Holy Spirit. And in today's session, we are looking at the topic of, I don't really know the best way to define this topic other than the title of this session, which is simply, we see in part, right? And that title, it is derived from a verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. A little bit of context, one chapter prior, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the gifts of the Spirit are laid out. And then in chapter 13, it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I'm becoming as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And then it goes on to delve into the topic of love and the importance of love. And as this chapter begins to wrap up, chapter 13, we have 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 9, which makes the statement, which is what the title of today's session is derived from, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. One chapter later, chapter 14, Paul lays out kind of the order of operation of the gifts. But let's lock in on 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 9. One simple verse, one simple ideal. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. Prayer is more than a list of petitions. Prayer, it is a list of petitions. It's us coming to God, oftentimes asking God to do something. But prayer cannot be just a list of petitions. It has to be a genuine conversation between us and God. You know, we do this thing where I don't even know the best way to say this. We oftentimes approach God with our petitions, and we have this expectancy of how we expect God to move. Rarely does God move like we're expecting him to move. Rarely does God's actions align with our perceived best path forward. God will do things contrary to the way that we would think or imagine. And he'll reveal and he'll give revelation. But as God reveals, as God gives revelation, as we approach God in the mix of the things that we're expecting him to do, as God shows us beautiful things, as God speaks to us through dreams and visions, and he reveals mysteries, there is something that God will not do. And that is reveal the full picture of everything. God will not show everything. God will not reveal everything. God will not move you from this place of partial understanding to full understanding. At no point in time through this dialogue with God, of us going to God and positioning ourselves to hear from God, at no point during this will God move us from the place of partial understanding to full understanding. 1 Corinthians 13 and 9, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. At no point in our walk with God will we know in full and prophesy in full. The things you know, you only know part of the picture. The things you prophesy, you only prophesy part of the picture. The things that have been revealed to you through dreams and through visions, it's only part of the picture. At no point do you see with a full understanding of everything that God is doing. Prayer does not move you to a place of you see all things and know all things. Prayer does not move you to this place where you just have all the answers and you know all the things that God knows. Every step of the way, as we approach God in prayer, we must approach Him with faith. If we knew all things and we had His knowledge, there would be no need for faith because we would already know all things. Think back to the 7-part arc we did on the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. The second to last church, the Church of Philadelphia. Jesus set before them an open door that He Himself opened and no man could close. And immediately after He says this, He says, "You're weak, but you've been true to me." God did not open the doors for the Church of Philadelphia that He opened because they were good and because they had all knowledge. They were weak and faithful. The Church of Philadelphia, with their open door that no one could shut, they knew in part and they prophesied in part. Paul, in the mix of everything that God did, he knew in part and he prophesied in part. The apostles, every step of their journey, they knew in part and they prophesied in part. Jesus rides into the city on the donkey. They think that He's coming to be king. They knew in part and they prophesied in part. They knew very, very little. And then Jesus dies, sends into the earth and preaches to the captive there. And then the Holy Spirit raises Him from the dead, and He is on earth for 40 days before He ascends into heaven. And before He ascends into heaven, the disciples once more be like, at this time, are you going to take your earthly kingdom now? Even after the resurrection, as Jesus dwelt with them, after He conquered hell, death, and the grave, they were still looking for Him to set up an earthly kingdom. Even in that moment, they knew in part and they prophesied in part. If the disciples post-resurrection think that Jesus has come to set up His earthly kingdom in the here and the now, like if that's their understanding of what He was doing in that moment, how messed up is our understanding of what we think God is doing? You might not understand everything that you see. Understand that not understanding's okay. Go to God in prayer. And as you go to Him in prayer, know that you are this weak vessel that sees in part and you know in part. Be okay seeing part and knowing in part. And just allow God to reveal more and more and more. But as He reveals, know what you're seeing is only part of the picture.